Warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here in the beautiful CNBC Tradeshift sanctuary. We appreciate your time. I have a fantastic panel in front of me here, and we're going to have a really interesting 30-minute discussion to talk predominantly about the fashion industry and the fast fashion industry and its impact when it comes to sustainability. And I have some very interesting statistics to tell you about, and I also want to introduce my fantastic guests because the fashion industry is worth about $3 trillion, but 73% of it, in terms of clothing, winds up in landfills. And I couldn't believe this number when I was first told it. 40 million people are currently, right now, in forced labour within the supply chain at some point or another within the industry. So it's an industry that has great pluses, but industry that also needs to do some big fixing at the same time. So what we want to know is what is the path forward. And our panel, I certainly hope and know that they've got some strong answers. I'd like to introduce you to Morten Lehmann. He is the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer at the Global Fashion Agenda. That is an umbrella organisation, if you will. Is that right? Representing a lot of retailers.
No, we're a not-for-profit organisation, the world's most foremost leadership organisation, focusing at the C-suite and really trying to push the industry to become more sustainable.
And plugged into those companies very much.
We have 9 strategic partners, but we are not a membership-based organisation. We're not-for-profit, trying to work closely with a few, and then trying to push the industry forward.
Great, good stuff. I'd like to introduce you as well to Sarika Garg, who is a venture investor and a board member at Tradeshift. You were pretty much involved in Tradeshift until not that long ago. Very warm welcome to both of you. Thank you very much. We're also joined by Dominic McVey, who's an entrepreneur and a former chairman at Hela Clothing. Hela is really doing a great job when it comes to sustainability. We'll hear about Hela Clothing in a bit more detail. And I'd like to introduce you as well to Leong. She is Global Lead, Decentralized Identity and Biometrics. That's a mouthful and a half, isn't it? At Accenture, basically blockchain. You're our blockchain expert on this panel. A warm welcome and a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay, so I would like to start with a couple of these statistics, as I've already mentioned a few of them already, because the fashion industry is great, isn't it? It is glamorous, it is exciting. Everyone likes to look good, and everyone likes to buy, well, most people certainly like to buy new clothes. It's an important industry as well, $3 trillion, and employs millions of people right around the world. And yet we hear things like 20% of all clothing made each year goes unsold, and the sheer number of people who are involved in the industry that, let's face it, aren't paid properly in the hours that they do. So it's an industry of two halves. How does that sit with you when you hear those statistics? Morten, let's start with you.
Well, that's why I'm in this industry.
Yep.
So I always wanted to save the world. That was on my whiteboard. Do the dishes, save the world. And when I did do that shift into a brand, people would say, "What are you doing, Morten?" And I said, "Well, my email address is mole. I'm trying to change it from the inside." So when my current CEO asked me for this job, this is why I'm in this industry. I want to make a difference. And this industry has all the challenges in the world. So that's why I'm in it. But it also is, we have a saying in Global Fashion Agenda that if we can change fashion, we can change everything. So if we can take the creativity and all that and inspire not only the industry, but also other industries, that's why I'm in this industry, to make an impact.
And you certainly are making an impact. Sarika, let's bring you in now. We were talking earlier, we're both good consumers of fashion. Of course, you're a businesswoman as well, a very successful one. But did you have any idea about what kind of industry, fashion industry?
So it's interesting. I grew up with my dad telling me that when he was in college, he had 2 pairs of clothes. And one he would wash and one he would wear, and then he would rinse and repeat every time. And I thought it was like the silliest story, because I love fashion and a big consumer of fashion. And actually, when fast fashion came in 20 years ago, it was very exciting for me, and because it opened up the doors, it democratized fashion, in my eyes. And as a supply chain person, it was actually amazing to see how these companies could understand the demand and respond to them so fast. It was really fascinating. So it was only very recently, maybe a year ago or so, that I started understanding the hidden truth about what happens in the back. And it's been fascinating. And I think you mentioned some of the statistics. The one that actually really got me was, if you take all the airplanes in the world and all the maritime ships in the world, and you add all of the greenhouse emissions that are coming from them, that's actually less than what happens, the greenhouse emissions from the fashion industry. And that is shocking.
And that's not a conversation people are really having, or are they?
They're not yet. And I think, I'm sure Morten is having them every day. This is what he lives. But I think there's very few people, and I have to give a lot of credit to the young ones who are coming in, the millennials like my niece, who are actually asking these questions. And I actually have a whole theory around it that, when my dad, my parents brought me up, it was a very simple world. It was not very complex. When you bought clothes, you bought one or two, and it was probably in your neighborhood. They were produced in your neighborhood. And the world became so complex in the last 30 years. So we never really learned how to ask the right questions about, where does what I eat come from, or where does what I wear come from? And we're learning now. But the millennials of our generation have already grown up in this complex world, so they've been asking a lot more of these good questions.
Dominic, how do you feel when you hear those statistics? What sticks out for you the most, given the work that you're doing right now?
It's shocking, quite frankly, and none of us can deny that. The challenges that we face also stem right through to the consumer habits, and the waste that we see, an industry which is associated with labour abuses, poor salaries, environmental degradation. These are, as a young man, things that I never grew up believing in, and something I do not believe in now. I got into the garment industry about 6 years ago. I was 27, with some other people, lent a company some money. In the UK, it had assets in Sri Lanka. It couldn't repay this British company, so I took these assets. It was a factory in Sri Lanka, and was thrown into the deep end of the garment industry and saw, not in this factory in particular, but the atrocities were happening in the industry globally, and starting to understand. So
what did you see?
I have to say Sri Lanka is very forwards in terms of garment manufacturing, and is very much respected for the work it's done. But the stories that you hear about, and the challenges with Rana Plaza at the time, which were beyond acceptable, and people knew about it. So I got into an industry having come from wanting to do good, always doing good, seeing an opportunity to do some real good and make some change. So over the last 7 years, I was able to grow Hela to almost 15,000 employees, doing about $200 million in revenue across sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Southeast Asia. And I was able to do that by putting the right foot forwards, working with brands, working with communities, engaging with society, and also those that want to make change. I wasn't looking to, I didn't know how to make clothes, so I came in with new ideas, new thinking, challenged the norm, so to speak. So we were able to make a huge difference, and 2% of our workforce in Ethiopia has a disability. We want to get that higher. 20% of Ethiopians are born with disabilities. We need to be reflective as a community, as a manufacturer. We've planted over 10,000 trees. Most of our factories are solar powered. We provide childcare facilities, mental health facilities, sexual health planning for women. We've conducted, with the support of the community, several thousand smear tests. These are conditions that in communities we're not aware of that could lead to cervical cancer. So we've been able to do more than just make clothes in a sustainable way. We've been able to engage communities and take them forwards into prosperity. There's no point going to regions creating jobs for the sake of jobs, and to some degree entrapping people in the world of capitalism. We need to bring people into communities and leapfrog them through society so that they can benefit from the changes. And Hela, and my role at Hela, we were very much able to do that. We have over 40 deaf workers at our factory in Nairobi. We're the largest employer of deaf workers. Heavy machinery is involved, and these are actually, as we work with the societies and the charities, say these are roles that need to be used. We don't have a lot of heavy machinery at Hela, but we have sign language programs throughout our community. We have almost 5,000 people learning sign language. So you can make a change from the inside, but as you said, it's a $3 trillion industry, and Hela's only doing $200 million of that.
And Christine, I want to bring you in now. I mean, it's also an industry that has one of the most complex, if not the most complex supply chains. I mean, just paint that picture for us. What does it look like and where are the potential areas?
I think it is one of the most interesting industry in terms of the components. Think about the buttons. Think about the threads.
Yeah.
Each and every thread. On this dress alone, there are probably several different colors of threads, different bits of cotton, different ways of cutting, different materials, and thinking through, how do you trace that? When it says, I can trace it back to a forest that was responsibly grown, how do I know as a consumer that bit of that thread is responsibly grown? And that wasn't, it didn't burn some forest down. It didn't cause a significant environmental damage. It didn't kill a lot of wildlife. So how do I know as a consumer? And those components, it goes through from sort of the seeds component of the cotton, all the way through the factory, of the seamstress, of the packaging, the logistics. How does it all get to your stores? And then at the end of it, how do we recycle it? Because we think about, okay, it's in my closet now, my dress. But what happens when I don't wear it anymore? What do I do? I mean, we know how to recycle plastic bottles. How do I recycle my shoes or my dress? What do I do?
Actually, I mean, if we take your dress, why not? Because it's a beautiful dress as an example. Is it clear, and you might not be able to answer this, how many components have gone into making that dress, and where did it all come from originally?
I try, and I as part of the work we're doing at Accenture, I invented the concept of a circular supply chain. It started with food, and thinking about a granola bar, how many components go in, and it's not that different than a dress because there's so many components. Yeah. I don't know how many bits of components.
Hundreds? Or more?
Hundreds. Because there's the belt component that is not real leather. There are buttons here, there are different color threads, there are so many bits, and at least it's one color, and there's no embroidery. If there's more stuff on it, there will be more. So thinking through all of that, then how many people are impacted? How many of those maybe, they say, yes, this is a sustainably produced organic cotton that didn't burn forest. How do I know? If I'm spending that much money on it, I want to know as a consumer. I want to be assured. I want to have trust in what I'm buying.
Can I just add to that? Yeah. Because actually, in terms of progress in this industry, this is where we're seeing a lot of progress. Several brands, traceability, which is like the preconditions for doing anything. If you don't know if my clothes is made from your factory somewhere, it doesn't matter. But we see that a lot, that you can actually, when you buy from several brands, you can go in and see, okay, where is it made and the materials. Of course, it's a lot more difficult on that dress compared to this. But this t-shirt, I know when I got this, I could see who had sewn it down to the person. So I think in that area, we're seeing a lot of progress, actually. So that's quite, and of course, with new technologies, it will be even easier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's take a step back, Morten, and with your help here, going back to the supply chain, because you've got emissions and sustainability within the supply chain, and then you've got what to do with the end product. And it is mind-boggling, isn't it? You start from the raw materials right the way through to the delivery and in the shop. Where are the key areas that need to be worked on right now in terms of reducing carbon footprint, but also reducing the issue of forced labour? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean,
because you're making good inroads.
And that is what, when we measure progress on our reports, we have around, the first year we did it, we had around 50% of CEOs says, we do not think we want to get started. So based on that, we did a CEO agenda with 4 priorities to get started, right? So the first thing is traceability, right? Find out where your goods are made. The next thing is looking at the workforce. How are they treated? And it's looking at the energy use, the harmful chemicals, and then it's materials. But if the solution is the system, we talk about technology. We talk about that there are factories in Bangladesh, even in Sri Lanka, other places that are amazing. So we can also judge, and there are factories in Europe that are having big issues on supply chain. But if the system doesn't work, if the incentives are not there, technology is just a means. Without the right incentives, we have the Copenhagen Fashion Summit. We had a manufacturer who was there 10 years ago, and he came back to a jubileum. He said, "So what was your biggest mistake?" He said, "Oh, I was starting my work on sustainability." And people were like, "Why?" He said, "No, it was really good for my business, but back then I thought I would get more customers, but no customers are asking me for this. So I run a much better business because it's leaner, But so we still have a procurement perspective that brands there's still a price issue, right? You still ask for the price. So they are starting to include more and more aspects on sustainability, but we still have a far way to go.
Maybe if I can add to that, only 6% of the world's supply chain is traceable. Like companies know what their supply chain is. And I've been in the supply chain industry for 20 years. We've talked about traceability for pharma, we've talked about traceability for food, but traceability for fashion is actually a very unknown concept. I think we are the only panel in Davos that is talking about it. And this is a climate change Davos, you know.
Well, for example, we have a factory in Kenya. We buy the cotton or the finished goods from China. But really what's happening, it's being grown in the west coast of Africa. It's being ginned in India. It's then getting spun in China, possibly dyed in Pakistan, and then coming back to Kenya to be cut, and then going on a ship to the US. That is killing the planet, and it has to stop. And these are challenges that we constantly face. And you spoke about the cost of doing good. There was a factory opened in Sri Lanka, LEED Platinum, the first garment factory in the world. I'm not going to mention the brand, but the brand turned up and did a big ceremony, and heads of state turned up. And within a year, that brand wasn't buying from that factory because it said it was too expensive. So then that manufacturer invested millions of dollars in making that leap forwards to have a LEED Platinum garment manufacturer. You know, world-class sustainability, said it's too expensive. And this is a brand that claims sustainability.
And what's happened to it now?
The manufacturer's been able to work with brands that understand the value of sustainability. But it also pushes down to the consumer. If we continue to have poverty in the developed world and people can't, and there is still unfortunately a financial cost to sustainability. We know there's a huge environmental cost, but there's also to not having sustainable goods. There's a huge financial cost still to sustainable goods. And whilst we have 1 million people in the UK going to food banks, the last thing they're thinking about is where their T-shirts are coming from.
And I want to talk about the consumer in a few minutes, because obviously they are the most important people in this conversation. But Christine, let's bring you back in, because Sarika said a really interesting fact there. Only 6% of the supply chain is currently transparent, which is why we have all these abuses going on and people who people are blind to it. Is the pressure there to increase that transparency? Is the technology there? How transparent could it get if you've got the best case scenario in front of you?
I think from a technology standpoint, the technology is there. There are lots of companies investing in this space, especially around the blockchain space, in terms of, in addition with IoT, because in Internet of Things, with devices that can capture, sensor, and automate some of that. And of course, this isn't easy, because you need connectivity, you need electricity, you need all of those kind of things. And in order to capture the right data but those processes also need to go hand in hand. The companies that want the transparency of data, and the consumers need to be requesting that transparency of data. But the technology is there. Technology, we can do it.
But how would you do as a consumer? What would you request? I think that is the challenge. In food, why has organic food grown like this? Because it's so easy to choose non-organic and non-organic. If you want to be a sustainable fashion consumer, what is it you look for? But of course, it's coming. There is one, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is developed. A little thing that will be up here. It's coming in about 2 years. So we can actually see how sustainable clothing is, because I think that's also the challenge. It's really difficult to navigate. We have so many, we have fair trade, we have something that says up here, okay, no harmful chemicals. So I don't get an itch up here, but the manufacturer, oh no, I don't know what happened to him. Or this cotton is organic, but
the sourcing directors don't know. And I'll give you an example. When the US brought in sanctions on North Korea in relation to the garment industry, every sourcing director in the US had a heart attack, because they actually didn't know if they were sourcing in China, if their goods were coming from North Korea. So you had sourcing directors on the chopping block, potentially going to jail, because there was a chance that the Chinese factories were actually making their goods in North Korea.
Can they ever know? Can companies ever truly know?
I think with the technologies that we're hearing about and the transparency through brands, Patagonia is a fantastic example. They've still work to do it amongst every single brand, but as you said, you can trace the factory. But it gets really difficult when it comes down to the farming, the seed, how the farmer is treated. Is there the dyeing process? Is there water recycling? What's the affluent discharge? There's so many steps that we need to map it out. But I think the technology is there and the wheel's there. And as you said, what is the difference between buying sustainable and unsustainable? Does the consumer really know? And, you know, what...
Well, it's also, does the company even know, right?
Yeah. Right,
and,
yes.
And so, you know, we've been working with Levi's for a few years, and what they are saying is, can you help us figure out how it becomes easier to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing? And so if nobody is able to trace what's happening, you don't even know what's happening. You can't stop it from happening. You don't have any monitoring on it. And so it's an interesting thing that they also have it for, like they have it for themselves, and then for the suppliers and suppliers about how they can do that.
They're very aggressive on the first tier suppliers.
Yes.
They're not particularly strict on second and third.
And so first tier being?
First tier is, the brands generally interact with someone like me. It's called CMT, cut, make and trims. So
in the factory?
In the factory. So we receive the fabrics, we receive the elastics. If it's a bra, 32 pieces in that, just to let people know how many pieces in a bra.
Amazing, isn't it? So
we get all those
fascinating.
pieces in, we put it together, we're effectively like an assembly shop, and we send it out to the DCs across the world. We're the first tier. Second tier would be the mills. Third tier would be pushing back into, say, the ginners. Fourth tier, you'd be pushing down into the farmers. So they're very good at the first tier, and that's often where the NGOs put a lot of their attention. But I think we're now seeing that push to second and third.
And some of the work that we're doing is actually, especially around the forced labor aspect, it's actually as you go down those tiers, is assigning, giving an identity to the person, to the person who's the farmer. And it might be a different industry because it does cross sectors. So by providing, saying, I know that the farmer who grows the cotton, the people who works in the factory, then you have a level of being able to say that garment in that entire supply chain, was there forced labor, was there a violation of compliance around North Korea, and so on. So those are some of the things, and it doesn't just apply to sort of the people identity aspect, but also to the things. Then ability to say, use those data standards of saying, right, this is regarded as a piece of threat, then let's log it, let's take those data, but it's going to take time.
A long time, by the sound of it. Is the will of the companies there, do you think, in all of this, Morten? Because if they're found out, the consequences are dire on a PR level, aren't they? But given the complexity...
That's an interesting question, because what are the consequences? We saw Rana Plaza. It doesn't get any worse, right?
The share price dropped 2% for 2 weeks. It was back up afterwards.
And some of the companies who had production in Rana Plaza, they got millions, no, not millions.
Just remind us what happened.
So Rana Plaza was the building that collapsed.
Yeah, in Bangladesh.
Yeah, 1,100 people died. It doesn't get much worse of one of the biggest industrial catastrophes. So what happened there, some of the brands who had production there, they got all the NGOs, they emailed. One of the brands said they got 2 questions from customers. Right? So what we often see on the business case for this is always, do you want to work for that company, right? Can I go around to all the big universities, or can you sit around the Christmas dinner and say, oh, I work there, and say, oh, you flunked all your exams, because how can you work for a company without a purpose? So I think that's one thing. But in terms of are brands ready to do this? I think when we look at it in the surveys we do, we have around 60% of the industry really being engaged at different levels, but we have 40% doing next to nothing. So if we only focus on the Patagonias and the companies doing really well, we're not going to get there.
So you said 40% doing next to nothing.
Doing next to nothing.
So it's a huge number, isn't it?
Yeah. And so that's one of the things, and that's why we say, okay, without regulation. So we've tried to show the business case, how should this provide guidance, and still we see that the growth of the industry, 80% towards 2030, and the growth of sustainability performance is not catching up. That gap is only growing wider. So we need a new system, basically.
Sarika, that's interesting, because you're an investor, and we're hearing here in Davos a tipping point, and how it seems it's the capital markets as much as consumers' attitudes changing that maybe will force change of businesses in between. So what are investors' positions when it comes to investing in fashion? And if companies have no visibility themselves, how on earth can investors have visibility?
Well, the reality is we are all investors, right? We all have 401ks or some form of pension fund or something like that. And yesterday you had Richard Curtis on stage here talking about the financial footprint, about how we actually don't pay so much attention to where our money is being put in. And so as an investor, I'm either investing my own money or I'm investing other people's money, but it's consumers' money in the end. And so it does, in the end, come down to the consumers asking the question, what is the right thing here? What is my money? You can vote with your money, so either buying or investing. And actually, have I thought about where my money is going to go and what it's going to lead to? And the reality is, very little is thought about. When I invest, I think about sustainability, but I actually think a lot about the returns. That's the main goal.
Is that changing? It seems to be here. I don't know if it'll happen in reality, though.
I think we're at the point where things are changing, and things always get a little bit worse before they change. So I think we're at the point where we're going to see a big shift happening in the next few years.
Let's talk about the role of the consumer. We've not talked about the consumer yet, the most important person in all of this. At the moment, cheap clothes accessible to all, which is fantastic for us, not great for the planet, though, isn't it? The people who work within the industry. Let's start with you, Dominic. Will our consumers, will they be prepared to spend more for their products? And will they be prepared maybe to buy less? How do you square that circle?
The consumer is extremely price sensitive, and the markets have pushed that aggressively. There's almost like a race to the bottom on price. And the margins, although considerable, are shrinking for the brands. As a manufacturer, it's not about selling as much product as possible, because what happens is if a brand buys too much of a pink T-shirt and it doesn't sell enough, they're pushing back on you. So you're stuck with the stock. There's huge cash flow cycle times in garment manufacturing. So your money is locked up in stock. You're paying interest on that. And you want to get it out. So as a manufacturer, what we need to think about, and what Hela thinks about, is making sure the customer has the right product at the right time. And that can actually drive better profits for customers because they can sell product at full price. They don't have to chase a sale. It's better for a manufacturer because they've got stability of income. They're not sitting on tons of containers. And so we at Hela, a lot of my role was really trying to drive what we call a min-max model. You have 5,000 white T-shirts, you hit that level, you start making again, you hit 50,000, you drop again, getting close to customer, closer to consumer, and giving the consumer the product they want at the right time at the right price. There's a lot of technology involved in that, there's a lot of science involved in getting that right. But I come back to my point earlier, the consumer, there's a question of affordability still on sustainability. I don't think there should be. I think we can make sustainability affordable, and we shouldn't be faced with these challenges. But if we don't overcome, and I restate, if we don't overcome poverty in the developed world, we will not overcome poverty in the underdeveloped world, because there will still be someone trying to pay the lowest buck and the lowest dollar, which means people won't get paid a fair wage. And people that are not getting paid a fair wage, you can also guarantee the factories do not care about environment, their waste, their processes. They're under the cosh. They've just got to get it out. And there'll be brands, those 40% out there, it's catering to that market, and it won't stop. So there's a balance of affordability on both sides that needs to be driven.
Christian, I'm sorry.
No, just briefly. I mean, we did a survey on consumers trying to see, is there a business case in engaging with consumers? 7% said, and this is a global survey, 7% they wanted to pay more. I don't believe that. I think it's less.
And only 7%.
But I think it's even less. But also, I don't think, as per your comment, you shouldn't pay more, right? It should be the new normal.
We would like people to pay more, yes.
And for that to happen, we need regulation. The most polluting piece of clothes where you don't pay a living wage should be the most expensive one, right? So it's also about new regulation.
Do you guys think regulation is the way forward? I don't know, just a quick litmus test. Is that in your opinion?
I think markets should be free. But what I will say is, if companies don't change, they will go bust. And I'll come back to Rana Plaza. The companies that didn't change after that Rana Plaza disaster, a lot of them are not in business today. They're not around. They didn't change their habits. They didn't change their sourcing strategies.
In terms of the manufacturers.
In terms of the manufacturing. And what it comes down to is, consumers want quality. Whether it's sustainable quality or unsustainable quality, they want quality. They want a product that has a good feel. They want the product in the factory at the right time. If you continue to work with scrupulous manufacturers, you will have a product that the consumer doesn't want. you'll be just pushing down price and you'll go out of business. And just because it's legal today doesn't mean it will be legal tomorrow is the other thing that we need to think about. You will go bust if you don't change.
Sarika?
So I actually want to talk about the technology angle of this. So if you think of it, technology is a tool, and unfortunately, technology has been a large part of this race to the bottom. So what's happened? E-commerce. So okay, you click once and you buy something, and it shows up at your doorstep. Even worse to me is social media, Instagram. So I want to put my picture up every 6 hours or every day, and I need to look cool in my outfit, and I need to look like my role model, by the way. We have all these celebrities with millions of users, and they're the role models that everybody is copying. So in some ways, technology has enabled it, but you could actually use the same methods to sort of work it backwards. So what if a celebrity who has 20 million followers, and we have some of them at Davos this year, what if they actually talked about, can I wear, this dress that I'm wearing, I'm going to wear it 10 times before I give it back, or give it to somebody. That would be amazing, and what a great platform, but nobody is doing it, or nobody that I know, and that means something.
Do you want to come in?
And I think for consumers, there needs to be incentives. There need to be, for businesses and consumers, whether they're at the 40%, whether they're consumers, how do we collectively incentivize the consumer to use it more? Whether it's a celebrity, and I 100% agree with you, the only person I can think of who wears the clothes over and over again is Princess Anne of the UK. But
Tiffany Haddish did that.
It's like, how can we incentivize the people to wear the clothes more, to actually recycle it? How do we make it easier to recycle? Because if it's not easy, people are not going to do it. It's not just financial incentives, or what are the other type of incentives for companies and consumers?
But what does that mean for the industry? I mean, if we're buying less, that's a disaster, isn't it, for retailers, Morten?
No, I mean, the one thing we are focusing on is redesigning growth. We can't, even if we pull all the existing levers in terms of you using less energy, everything, we're not going to have a sustainable industry. So we need to look at how can the industry still make money, still provide good jobs, but within planetary boundaries. So what are the new business models? We've seen it in other industries. We don't buy a CD or DVD anymore, right? And we talk about consumers. It should be customers, right, who rent it. Because also, think about the business idea. If I sell this T-shirt and I sell it once, the longevity of this, I don't really care, right? Or anything else. But if I sell that 4 times, hey, I better make sure that this one can last a long time. So have these new business models that really forces you to be more sustainable, because I will care about that customer. I sell it to because I want it back, and I will really care about making a product that is really made to be used again and again and again. So some of these new business models where you can still be a profitable business, but within planetary boundaries and towards, increasing middle classes with a big demand for new clothes.
You've got a big job on your hands, haven't you? As we get towards the end of the panel, I just want to get some closing comments from all of you. Please, you say what you want, or you could take my lead. I mean, another incredible statistic is up to 85% of textiles go into landfills each year. That's enough to fill Sydney Harbour, which is extraordinary. That's every year. What timeline, what are your hopes for the industry, and how long will it take to achieve your kind of dreams? I don't know, let's start with you, Christine.
I think the timeline is questionable, but I think there's a lot of growth. With a lot of the retailers, you can see the brands, you can see that they're trying to invest. And I think my view is really, for consumers, put your money where your body is. Put your money where your mouth is, and look at the label, understand it, ask your retailer, ask the brands, interact, ask more questions, and be able to say, right, I'm buying responsibly and consciously, and make the right decisions.
Yeah, well said. What would you say, Dominic?
Ultimately, the consumer's got to drive that change. We're pushing. Hela is pushing. When I was at Hela, we pushed constantly. And we worked with some amazing brands. I have to say, we exited a number of brands, but Hela has very deep relationships with the likes of PVH and VF Corp, some of the biggest brands in the world, and they are moving forwards. They are making change. But we have to enable the consumer, and we have to keep asking questions. There's so many issues involved in it. And is regulation a question? Possibly, should sourcing directors go to jail if they knowingly or unknowingly buy from a factory that has slave labour? Will they go to jail if they knowingly or unknowingly involved in corruption?
It'd be hard to fill those jobs, wouldn't it, Aaron?
Right, so they should, you know, we're talking about someone's lives here. So there's a lot of questions to be asked. There's a lot of change. In England, we have the Enterprise Investment Scheme, that we give tax reliefs to people that may be paying women less than men. That's unacceptable. Let's change these schemes to the ethical investment schemes. Let's get government involved and keep the free markets. And what can consumer do? I could talk all day about the changes I want. I'm sure we all could do. But I think this is a great panel of people that want change and positive change, which is fantastic.
Sarika?
So I think I hold a pessimistic view, but most of the time optimistic. The pessimistic view is, if you give me a dress for $5, which literally has been happening, I will buy it, and I'll buy 10 of them. But if you make my dress $200, I'm going to think about it. And so I think price does matter, and that's a pessimistic view in some ways, because that leads to higher prices for everybody. The optimistic view is, my niece, the millennial, is my optimistic view, because she does ask these questions. Yep. And that's the consumer speaking up and saying, hey, why aren't you doing this right? And I bet she'd be willing to pay a few more dollars as well. So I hope the world goes that way, and at least from now on, I'm going to be much more of a person who asks the questions as you talk.
And that's half of it, isn't it? Just being aware and asking. Morten, what would you say?
So my hope for the future is that we will have a positive vision for the future. And I'm talking about political leadership and corporate leadership, to speak about what can the future look like if we take action now. Not next year, now. Then we can have a positive vision for the future. In terms of engaging people, I think that's important. You can't engage people on the doomsday. You can say it needs to happen, but you need that positive vision. And what I do think will be required for a business to be alive also next year is you need to be much more honest. You need to say, what's your purpose? But show that honesty and be bold enough. You will get really bad stories in the press by being honest in the beginning, by saying, I'm not perfect, because no company in the world is perfect on sustainability. But if you're honest and say, this is what I do for my brand, this is what we focus on, we can make the biggest impact here. Are we perfect? Not. Will we then regain the trust of NGOs, customers, and trying to engage them on this? Yes. It will be tough, but I think that's the only way forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Morten, Sarika, Dominic and Christine, thank you so much for your thoughts this hour. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. That was really interesting.